Hey, welcome back to Bob's Two-Car Garage. Stick around, I'm going to show you how myself and a bunch of my friends built this 160-foot long wood fence. You can do this. Hi, my name is Bob and I love my two-car garage. All right, well, the first thing you're going to do is establish a nice straight line. And you're going to do that with some builder's twine or some mason's twine. This twine is going to be your friend all throughout this project. You need to secure it at both ends nice and securely, nice and strong. And a couple suggestions there. If you have an existing structure, you can of course attach to that because it's probably not going to move. My favorite is the form stake here, a 3-foot form stake. You can drive this thing down into the ground with a sledgehammer and it'll be nice and tight. It won't move on you. And when you're all done, it's really not that hard to get out. You just kind of wiggle it back and forth and it'll come right out. And get that thing nice and tight. Might be a good idea to get a friend to kind of help you work the slack out of the string, but it needs to be good and tight. A trucker's knot at one end is a nice option if you know how to tie one to get it good and tight. And also while you're working with it, make sure you don't push it around. Sometimes it gets pushed around by just the structure that you're building, or a rock gets in the way or something like that. So make sure that that line stays straight.
What's that?
Loving the family.
Yeah.
That's right.
It doesn't go well.
Now, once you've established that straight line, obviously you have to dig some holes. We had 20 holes to dig, 21 holes to dig. So we had a lot of help, so we just did it with a post hole digger. Most do-it-yourselfers are gonna use a post hole digger. The jousting rod or that digging rod works really well too to kind of clean up the edges.
So I can open and close the louvers.
Oh, nice. What are the louvers made out of?
First couple of days was pretty stormy.
Was it something you designed or did you buy it?
You go too?
Now, if you really don't want to dig a bunch of holes, you can always go out and rent one of these guys, an auger. And these things are great. I've used these before, but if you're doing it by yourself and you got a bunch of holes to dig, it might be a good option for you. We had more post hole diggers and people than we had augers, so we dug them by hand. We dug our holes 8 feet apart. Actually, we dug them 7 foot 11 inches apart, and the reason I do that is because my 2x4s that I'm going to lay up on the top are 8 feet long, and sometimes I'm a little bit off, and I don't want there to be a gap right here, so I'd rather cut an inch off the end and make sure that it's a nice tight joint at the end. So 7 foot 11 inches apart is how I space these. So I usually go a little bit under. It's also a good idea to paint the dirt with some dirt paint. I don't think it's called dirt paint, it's got a better name than that, but this is just striping tape. But one way or another, you want to mark the dirt so that you get that hole exactly where it needs to be. It's easy as you're digging with that post hole digger to get off just a little bit, and then when you come back to set the post, you end up having to scrape the sides of the hole to get that post exactly where you want it to be. So mark the dirt first so that you get that hole in the right place. Now, the most frequently asked question is, how deep should I dig those holes? It depends on your dirt. The rule of thumb is 1/3 the height of your post. So if you got a 60-inch post, you're gonna go 20 inches deep. Now, but again, it depends on the soil. And if your soil is real soft, then you gotta go deeper. So the way that you can tell is if you take a stake like this, one of these metal stakes, and you drive this into the ground as deep as you think it should go, and you bend it, the dirt should not move. The metal post or the metal stake should bend before the dirt turns. So I'm not doing metal, so I couldn't do it that way. But if a car hit this post, the post should break before it comes out of the dirt. I'm not going to test that, but that is the rule. So if you want to really know how deep to go, drive a metal stake into the ground as deep as you think it should go. Give it a little tug. If the dirt doesn't move, you're deep enough.
Behind you? Yeah, that'd be fine. You have to go low, you go low.
Once you have all those holes dug, then you're ready to set the posts. Now, those posts need to be plumbed up both ways. They need to be plumbed up left and right and forward and backwards. Yeah, they do.
You ready? There? Better there. Good. Then move it. No. Then we'll put a stake in.
All right, I want to show you an option here on the bracing. If you notice these guys, and they did it all the way down, they braced it this way to hold the plumb this way, and they braced it this way to hold the plumb this way, which that's great. And they did that all the way down. You have to have it braced both ways. But what you can do, rather than do all of them that way, once you do your first post, plumb it up this way and this way, the next post, you can just attach the material that you use for framing to the top of this post and connect it to the top of this post and use that post to plumb up this post. I like doing it that way for a couple of reasons. Number one, I can use the material that I purchased for framing for my bracing as well. Also, what it helps to do is when I attach this 2x4 to the face of this post and the face of that post, it keeps the face of the post nice and lined up the whole way. So you can individually brace these posts if you want to, but this works real well too. Notice we used some form stakes right here on either side, which are really my favorite because you can ram them in there nice and deep and they're nice and strong. But if you look around, or if you notice, we also use some wood stakes from here and there. I think there's one right back there. But form stakes are my favorite. You want it to be nice and solid. Now you're ready to mix and pour your concrete. Now, you can mix, of course, in a wheelbarrow, but we had an old mixer available, so we used it. And I realize that there's some options on the concrete, but I always use just the normal slow setting stuff. It works fine. I'm not in a hurry, and I don't mind if it takes a while for it to set up. And I like to put a shovel full of gravel in the bottom of the hole. And the reason I do that is because if water settles down deep in the bottom of that hole, we don't want it to soak up into the post, and the gravel will kind of give it a place for that water to soak in. So it's a kind of an old-fashioned thing, but it works. I use the slow setting stuff and I mix it wet and pour it in the hole. I know that some people actually just pour that concrete in there dry and let nature take its course. They let the moisture that's in the dirt soak into the concrete and let it harden on its own, but I don't really think that's the best idea. I think you should fill up that whole hole and then use something to work it into the hole, work out all the voids. My favorite is the form stake, because I can stick that in there, work it all around, and make sure I got that hole nice and filled up. You want to fill up the entire hole. He's good.
Yeah, he is.
When you pour your concrete, you should fill up that hole all the way. So if anything, it should be a little bit above the grade, because usually where a post rots is right here at the grade, and it's because that concrete is a little bit lower than the grade, so the water sits right there. So fill it up all the way. If anything, you want to go a little bit above the grade. Now, after a while, this will shrink a little bit, and you're going to get a little bit of a crack between the concrete and the post. So if you really want to do a good job, you can take a little bit of caulk, and there's some special cement caulk that you can run along that crack and seal that crack up, because if it rots at all, it's going to rot right there at the post, where the post meets the concrete. Now, if you notice right here, we got a little sonotube, or a concrete form tube down here at the where we poured concrete on this particular post. Now, I don't really recommend that, because you really want to fill up that hole with concrete completely, and you want that dirt to be compacted. So if I throw a sonotube all the way to the bottom of the hole, that means I'm going to have to throw dirt around it. That dirt's not as strong as the dirt, or as compacted as well as the dirt that's been there for a while. Now, the reason we did this right here, and this only goes down about 3 inches below where you see it, we did that because we got that dip right here in this grade, and we needed to get this up a little higher. So there's times when a sonotube would be appropriate, but most of the time I don't like to use them. And but they do make the top look kind of pretty. So if you want the top to look pretty, you can put a sonotube just at the top where you're going to see the concrete, but don't run a sonotube all the way down, or a concrete tube all the way down, because it really is not as good as filling up that whole hole with concrete. Now, another thing that happened right here that made us, or forced us to use this sonotube, is when we were digging this hole, we hit something. That's why they say call before you dig. It was just a drain pipe, but we were only able to go down about, I think, 18-20 inches right here. So by lifting it up like this, gives us a little more to pack dirt around and make that post a little bit stronger. We didn't want to reroute the drain pipe, so we're just gonna have to live with this one not being quite as deep as it's supposed to be. So basically, after the first phase here, this is what it's gonna look like. You're gonna have it braced both ways, and if you get down on the end and look at this thing, it should look nice and straight. They should be all lined up with each other. Good idea, by the way, to step back every once in a while and just take a look at it to make sure that it does look good. Sometimes you get too close and you just can't really tell what's going on. You don't see like the forest for the trees. So we're gonna let these posts set up for a day or so before we start banging on them. I think they do make a quick set concrete that you could use where you can bang on it a little sooner, but really better to let it set up a bit before you start shaking it up. So really, how well you do this first phase of the project really is important, because it's gonna, your fence is gonna look good or it's gonna look bad depending on how well you line things up. So spend a little extra time on this. Remember that the mason's twine is definitely your friend. Get things nice and straight, get all your posts nice and plumb, and from there it's all downhill. Most importantly, it's always a good idea to put your initials in the concrete. So that way, 30 years from now, when your kids ask, who built this fence? You'll be able to tell them, it was me. The next step, of course, is to cut off the tops of all those posts that are running wild. And I suggest that, well, again, you're gonna be using the twine, a builder's twine, or maybe a chalk line to determine where the top of that is. But this is a point at which you really got to pull that string nice and tight and make sure it's not sagging. And we had 160 feet to go, so we actually did it in 2 sections, and snap the line and cut them off. I suggest that you get a spotter or a helper to catch the top of that post so that it doesn't fall down on your head. And I've had that happen before. Now, as you're establishing the top of that post right there, that's going to establish, of course, the top of your fence. And you want to follow the grade. You don't want to usually step it. And we had a grade here that actually changed. It changed like 3 times. So we went from the end to about the middle, and we have one pitch, and then we went from the middle to the rest of the way, and we have another pitch, and it looks good. It doesn't look like it sags. It looks good. It looks natural. So we had to change the pitch. You can change the pitch, but don't change it too much, or it might look like it's cattywampus. Wrong. Now we're to the framing phase, and I want you to notice that I like to use 3 2x4s to frame my fence with. I have one on the top that lays down flat. I have one underneath it that set in there vertically, and then I have one down low about 16 inches from the bottom that's vertically as well. This top one just gets nailed down from the top with a 16 penny galvanized nail.
2. Just 2. Yeah, try to angle them towards the post.
All right.
A little bit, just a slight angle.
This one here and this one here, the top one and the bottom one, you have some options on how you're going to fasten that. One way is just to toenail it. That's the way they used to do it all the time, with a 16 penny nail. I don't really recommend that. I think it's just not as strong. They make some hardware now that you can use for attaching that post right, this rail right here, and this rail down here, the top and the bottom rail, which you could use, but I think that's a little more expensive. My favorite way is to use pocket hole screws. And I drilled the pocket hole screws with a Craig jig, then I used a 3-inch deck screw and put it in at an angle like that. So it's kind of like a toenail, but it's better. And this one's done on this side. Most of the time we did them on the outside because you got more to screw to, but that's a good option. All right, now you're to the final phase, which is installing the pickets. So it really starts to look like a fence. Now, these can be installed with galvanized nails, or you can use deck screws if you prefer. We did nails at the top, 8-penny galvanized nails, and we did screws at the bottom. We just did it that way because that's what we had. And we didn't want if you use an 8-penny nail on the bottom, it's going to go right through the 2x4 that's on the bottom. So you need an 1.5 inch or an 1 5/8 inch fastener in the bottom. It could be a nail or it could be a screw, but whatever you use down there, make sure it's not so long that it's going to go right through the other side of the 2x4. Some little children might hurt themselves on that. Now you're going to start off by installing these things plumb, and then you're going to space them with a 16-penny nail or even an 8-penny nail as you go along. As you go along, you may see that you may need to continually check to make sure that things are still plumb. So every 4 or 5 pickets, I would put a level on it again, make sure that it's nice and plumb, and before you get to the very end or close to the end, you need to check the distance from where you are on your pickets to the end of the fence. If you're way off, or if you're off much, you need to start adjusting your spacing so that it comes out even when you get to the end. There have been times on the spacing where I didn't use any spacer at all, either a 16-penny nail or an 8-penny nail, and I did that because the wood was really wet. If you use really wet redwood, for example, it's going to shrink a whole lot. You can put these things right up next to each other, and in a couple weeks you'll have a 1/4 inch gap, or an 1/8 inch gap anyway. So normally with dry wood like these are cedar pickets, and so we put a gap in here, and it's probably going to remain the same. Now we used the string once again to make sure that the top of our pickets were all lined up with each other. And this is your last chance, by the way, to straighten anything out. If your framing is off a little bit, then you can straighten it out by making sure those pickets are nice and straight. For the most part, all people are going to notice is that top of those pickets. The top of the fence is what people are going to see. So get that top nice and straight. Now your finishing is an option, or is optional. You can just leave the wood bare. Cedar will turn gray after a while and it'll start to look not as pretty as this one. We put some Thompson water seal on here to finish it off because it will make it look nicer over time. All right, well, that's how we did it. We made this beautiful 160-foot long fence. I want to leave you today with this proverb that says, diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. Now, what does that mean to you and me? It's good to be a do-it-yourselfer. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.